Love your enemies. That is Jesus' admonition for you and me this morning. But it is a tough teaching. It is hard to hear. So I thought that I would begin with a cute little story to break the ice. Once upon a time, there was a pastor who was preaching on this passage about loving your enemies, and he wanted to show just how hard Jesus' words are. So he began by asking people to raise their hands if they had 10 or more enemies. And quite a few hands went up in the congregation. And then he asked for those hands to stay up and for other people to raise their hands if they had between 5 and 10 enemies. And so more people raised their hands. And then 3 to 5 and even more. And then even as few as 1 and 2. And everyone's hand was raised except for the gentleman sitting on the back row. The pastor found this very odd. And so he said, "Sir, this is miraculous. You mean to tell us that you don't even have one enemy? What a Christian witness to us. Could you please stand and tell us how you did it? What is the secret of your success?" And the man stood up and he said, "Well, preacher, my secret is simple. When you get to be 104 years old like me, you've outlived all your enemies." Now, I don't believe that we have any 104-year-olds that worship this morning. So may I be so bold as to assume that all of us have enemies. Some of us may not realize it at first, but there are people in our lives, in our world around us, that we simply can't stand and don't want to be near. Be it their ideology, their lifestyle, their skin color or ethnicity, their political or theological stance, or a shared history that we have with them. Our world seems to be torn apart by something on a constant basis. Whites and African Americans can't get along because of the atrocities of the past that no one seems willing to confess or forgive, and we are separated by lingering racism and prejudice in this country on both sides. Conservatives and progressives can't get along because they are only really interested in placing the blame on the other rather than working to fix what is wrong. Read the United States Congress. Citizens and immigrants to this country are at odds. In the church, it is Christians versus sinners, fundamentalists versus mainline church, traditional music versus contemporary music, NC State versus North Carolina. We always seem to find something that drives us apart, away from those kind of people. Martin Buber, a Jewish theologian who died in 1965, wrote a book entitled I and Thou. In it, he stated that the way that you and I use language represents our relationship to the other. You and I can speak of people in humanizing, respectful terms, I and thou. Or you and I can speak about others in dehumanizing, disrespectful terms, I and it. With I and thou language, we regard others as humans and equals and deserving. But with I and it, we reduce others to an object or a label or a thing and scorn, deride, or just ignore them. You and I do it every day. The Republican despises the Democrat and misrepresents their ideas, twists their words, and jockeys for political position. And the Democrat returns a favor. The Christian sets up straw men with weak and stupid arguments to trash the Muslim, and the Muslim returns the favor. We use words like liberal or conservative or socialist or capitalist or believer or heretic or any other chosen word with that hint of hatred in our voice. You and I find this cycle of dehumanizing the other person, those people, the enemy, going on in every arena of our lives. It seeps into our interpersonal relationships with family and coworkers. We are hurt by something that person said. So we say stuff about that person. That person did this to me, so I will do stuff to that person. That person believes what? I don't believe that way. Therefore, they are wrong. And not just wrong, but evil. And in our righteous indignation, we proclaim that evil must be destroyed. We create battle lines. We give ultimatums. We take sides. And the war is on. Well, today's passage from Jesus' great Sermon on the Mount is probably one of the most quoted and the least obeyed lessons in the Bible. And yet it is the most needed in this divided, contentious world that we live in. It's needed first and foremost in our lives. Oh, it is easy to point the finger and say, yes, if those people would just act this way, there would be no problem. But God doesn't give us the option of waiting for that person to get it. Jesus calls us to be obedient. Jesus says, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Jesus is giving you and me a personal principle, not a social principle. What I mean by that is that societies need laws and punishments to maintain order. The Old Testament tells the people of Israel how to conduct themselves in a community. They are given laws and then punishments that go with the law. And Jesus isn't mandating that societies do away with just punishments for crimes. But he is saying that the ability to bring judgment doesn't require that you bring punishment. God knows we have within us the capacity for tremendous amounts of evil. The legal requirement for taking an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life was established because people rarely stopped at the eye. This law was restraining. You and I, if we're honest with ourselves, more often than not want to inflict pain on those who've hurt us. And the problem is that the retribution and revenge rarely stop with an even amount of pain. You and I want to hurt those who hurt us and hurt them a little bit more. Fact is, we are more likely to overdo than to underdo retribution. You take my eye and I take your life. Jesus says, don't resist an evil person. On a personal level, when an evil person comes against us, when we are offended and attacked, do not resist the evil person. So how is Jesus calling you and me to respond? By turning the other cheek, giving them the shirt off our back, and carrying their load the extra mile. These responses can be divided into two main ideas. First, we are called to reconciliation, and then we are called to lives of open-handed compassion. The idea of reconciliation is found in Jesus' statement, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. See, turning the other cheek does not mean allowing people to beat us up. It doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to injustice in our world. It doesn't mean that we sit passively as weaklings. In Jesus' day, people kissed each other on the cheek in greeting. It was a gesture of friendship and acceptance. It's interesting that Jesus specifies the person is striking you on the right cheek. That means that the person is backhanding you. And even you and I understand the insult of a backhanded slap. But in Jesus' day, for someone to strike you on the cheek was one of the worst insults. So Jesus is saying, you're offering your cheek in friendship, and this person insults you and backhands you across the face. Turn and offer them the other cheek as well. Turn and offer them the other cheek as a sign of reconciliation. This is not a call to become a punching bag. In today's culture, it would be like extending your hand for a handshake and having the other person slapping it away or ignoring it altogether. What Jesus is saying is, keep on extending your hand. Keep on reaching out in friendship and reconciliation.